Welcome to part 2 of the Splendor of Rome through the eyes of a pilgrim. In part 1, we talked about what a pilgrimage is, but one important aspect of going on pilgrimage we didn't talk about is spiritual preparation. Remember, pilgrimage is different than a vacation. A pilgrimage has a spiritual intent. It is important to be prepared when we embark on a pilgrimage, certainly physically, because there's usually a lot of walking involved. But what are you doing to prepare your soul for an encounter with God on the journey? The sacrament of reconciliation is a good place to start. The grace of the sacrament clears away the obstacles to receiving His grace and everything the Lord wants to share with you on the journey. Second, prayer. When I take groups on pilgrimage, I always send out a novena before we depart. A novena is 9 days of prayer, which comes from the tradition of the apostles and our Blessed Mother waiting and praying in the upper room 9 days before the descent of the Holy Spirit. There are many different novenas you can actually find online to start you off. Third, ask your family and friends if they have any petitions they want to send with you when you visit and pray at the holy sites. Many of these holy sites have places for people to leave petitions or to sign up to offer Holy Mass for family and friends. And lastly, wherever you are going on pilgrimage, make sure to take your patron saints with you. In other words, if you are visiting Rome, be sure to include St. Peter and St. Paul in your prayers, especially before and during the pilgrimage. Now let's begin today's episode titled All Roads Lead to Rome. However, first we're going to begin on the road to Damascus. We know that Jesus covered a small territory when He lived among us. He formed His future apostles into what it means to be disciples. After Jesus rose from the dead and appeared to them, He gave them the Great Commission. Go into the whole world and proclaim the gospel to every creature. Whoever believes and is baptized will be saved. So it was their mission to carry and spread the good news of Jesus Christ. The good news is that God became man, Jesus Christ, who dwelled among us. It was Jesus, the unblemished Lamb, who was sacrificed to save us from sin and death. It was this sacrificial act that opened the gates of heaven again, where we, as His children, could now dwell with Him forever. This is the goal of everybody. This life is a pilgrimage to our final destination, to be with God. It was not just the 11 faithful apostles Jesus spoke to. There was another man who never met Jesus like the others, but he had heard about Him. His name was Saul, and he was busy persecuting the new Christians. Until one day, on the road to Damascus, a bright light blinded him, and he heard the voice of Jesus asking him why he was persecuting him. Saul fell to the ground, and when it was all over, he got up, and he could not see. If you don't know the story of St. Paul's conversion, you need to read Acts chapter 9, verse 19. This is your homework. Saul had a conversion after he heard the voice of Jesus on the road to Damascus. His sight was then restored. He was a changed man and gets a new name, Paul. He becomes baptized and a believer and becomes the apostle to the Gentiles. Damascus is a long way from Rome. How did Paul get to Rome? Well, Paul was brought to trial in Caesarea. The Pharisees were trying to have him killed. They didn't like his preaching, especially about Jesus Christ. However, they had no criminal evidence against him that would hold up in a Roman court of law. They would have to let him go. So he appealed his case to Caesar. As a Roman citizen, this was his right. The governor at the time, Festus, replied, "You have appealed to Caesar you will go." After this passage in Scripture, we get the details of the journey, which includes a shipwreck and other adventures before they ever arrive in Rome. Be sure to read it, the Acts of the Apostles, chapters 27 and 28. We have from an early historical accounts that St. Peter came to Rome as well, and certainly there is archaeological evidence of Peter being buried in Rome. There are markings on tomb walls in the Vatican necropolis indicating that people wanted to be buried as close to St. Peter as possible. You can get a full tour of the Vatican necropolis called the Scavi Tour. Just check online for reserving tickets. Now we're going to switch over to Rome and walk the Appian Way. So now we're going to switch over to the Appian Way. Here we are. The Appian Way was the first long road built outside of Rome, originally built to transport the troops, the Roman troops, built some 300 years before the birth of Christ. Today, some of the road has been preserved, as you can see behind me. It is believed that both Peter and Paul would have walked on this road. Historians estimated that Peter traveled to Rome between 42 and 52 AD and died around 64 AD. Paul traveled to Rome in 60 AD and died around 64 to 68 AD. It was a common medieval tradition that they both died on the same day, which is why they are often shown together in art. There is also another popular tradition that Peter was fleeing Rome to avoid persecution when Jesus appeared to him walking the other way. Peter said, "Lord, where are you going?" In Latin, "Quo vadis?" Jesus replied, "I am going to be crucified again." Peter realized he needed to turn around and face his own martyrdom. There's a church called Domine Quo Vadis that was built on the spot where tradition says this conversation took place. And there's even a footprint of Jesus left in stone you can see today. So now we're going to walk over to the Roman Forum. The Roman Forum would have been the central hub. Peter and Paul would have certainly walked around here. In fact, one can visit the prison where tradition says they were kept. It's just at the end of the Forum. It's called the Mamertine prison. Let's take a look at the Roman Forum. Here you will find the ruins of many temples, government buildings, and marketplaces. Today it is beautifully lit up at night. You have to pay to get into the Forum, but there is a nice view just walking down the sidewalk, which is just above it. I recommend walking by it at dusk so you can see some of the ruins, but also some of the lights at night. Peter was eventually killed. He was crucified upside down in Nero's circus, which think like a racetrack, just outside the city in the area called Vatican Hill. His body was buried close by in the Vatican necropolis, in a poor man's tomb. His followers eventually made it into a memorial, so it was clearly marked from the beginning. The Egyptian obelisk you see today in front of St. Peter's Basilica came from that circus and would have been in Peter's view as he died. Paul was taken outside the city wall and was beheaded and buried out there. Since he was a Roman citizen, it was considered a better way to die. These two men are some of the greatest saints in the church and are the patrons of Rome. Saints Peter and Paul are depicted all over Rome, not only in the two glorious churches dedicated to them, but paired together in other places as well. Here in the Vatican Museums is an important piece of artwork. It is the Stepanacci Triptych by the famous medieval painter Giotto. This piece from 1320 AD was in the original St. Peter's Basilica. It was an altarpiece. Again, it shows the importance of these two great men together. They were the foundational pillars of the church, with St. Peter, our first pope, representing the stability and authority of the church, and St. Paul the Apostle to the Gentiles, representing the mission of evangelization. One interesting thing with this depiction of the beheading of St. Paul is the lady at the top catching a white piece of cloth. There was a story circulating in the Middle Ages that a devout follower of St. Paul was there at his execution. St. Paul asked her for her head cloth so that he might cover his eyes during the execution. He then told her to wait a certain area as he would return it to her, thus giving her a relic because of her great kindness. So you see here St. Paul returning it to her when he gets to heaven. There is another story that circulated around that St. Paul's head bounced 3 times on each spot, and water sprung forth from it. That is why today there is a church built on the site of his execution called Tre Fontaine, which means 3 fountains. So now we're going to take another look at another place where St. Peter and St. Paul are shown together. This is in the church of Santa Maria del Popolo. These pieces are painted by the famous painter Caravaggio, one of the greatest painters of the Baroque period. These paintings are shown together in the church of, as I said, Santa Maria del Popolo. Notice how the executioners are lifting St. Peter into position. They're dressed like laborers, not like Roman soldiers. And look how the one man is using his back to lift St. Peter. It looks more like they are building something, like a structure. One even has his arms leveraged on a shovel, and there are stones and rocks in the foreground. This is because they were placing St. Peter, the cornerstone, in place. As Jesus says, "Peter, upon this rock I will build my church." St. Peter's Basilica is built on the top of his tomb. Look at St. Paul. He is dressed like a Roman soldier, and look at his face, so calm, being bathed in this brilliant light. He is in ecstasy. He is hearing the voice of Jesus at this moment. This encounter with Christ completely changes him from one who persecutes the Christians to one who becomes persecuted because of his newfound faith and his mission to evangelize.
It is the Pantheon, right? The church, the temple to all gods.
As we continue our walk through ancient Rome, we come across the Pantheon. It was originally built in 27 AD and was dedicated as a temple to all gods. The Romans assimilated other gods from various places that they had conquered, so as to not offend any of them. They were all included in this temple. It was completely rebuilt after a fire by the Emperor Hadrian in 125 AD. The Pantheon is where the ancient Romans celebrated the founding of Rome, which is April 21st. The building was constructed with a large hole in the center of the ceiling called the oculus. The sun streams through the oculus like a giant spotlight during the day. On April 21st at noon, the sunbeam, the spotlight, is on the doorway. Now, this is important because this is where the emperor would be seen by the people outside. You see, the emperors believed they were of divine origin and descended from the pagan gods. So it was important to show some kind of external manifestation of this. So picture you're standing outside and you see this man bathed in bright light on April 21st, which is the important date in Rome. You already believe in various gods and goddesses, so you could see how it's not far of a jump to believe that the emperor is divine as well. The Romans have always been great at theatrics. The ceiling used to be in marble and bronze, but in the 1600s, Pope Urban VIII took the bronze and melted it down to be used for other purposes. One of those is for the baldacchino of St. Peter's Basilica. The Pantheon is considered a marvel of Roman engineering. Just down the street from the Pantheon, we can see more Roman ruins that were preserved in a square called Largo Argentina. It's a popular square where you can catch many different buses around the city. In the middle of the square, much lower than street level, are the ruins. What is significant about these ruins is this is the place where Julius Caesar was assassinated. The place was called the Curia of Pompey. The Roman Senate often met there. Today there's not much left of the Curia, but you can buy a ticket and walk through the ruins where there are signs that describe what you're looking at. All right, let's move on to one of the great Roman landmarks, Castle San Angelo. It's not far from St. Peter's Basilica, and now there is a nice pedestrian-only walkway connecting the two. The castle was originally built as a mausoleum for the Emperor Hadrian. You will notice on the very top a statue of St. Michael. He was placed there because in 1590 AD, Pope Gregory the Great led a procession through the streets of Rome, imploring the Lord to take away the plague. He claimed a vision of St. Michael appeared on top of the mausoleum, sheathing his sword as a sign of the end of the plague. Later in the 14th century, it became a castle for the popes to use, especially as an escape route from St. Peter's to a structure that could be used as a defense if the city was being invaded. You can still see the escape wall today. Now, this is a lot of early Roman history, but walking around Rome and seeing the ancient ruins helps you to place yourself in the story. It's your story. It's the story of the church. Imagine how these two great apostles and a small band of Christians changed everything. Rome was an enormous, powerful pagan empire with pagan ideals and lifestyle, which was at odds with Christianity. It's a world where Christians were martyred just for their beliefs. The saying goes that the streets of Rome flowed with the blood of the martyrs, and now we experience the fruit of their witness. Next time, we will see the fruit as beautiful basilicas were built over the tombs in their honor. Hope you can join me.